Hi, this is our presentation on animal testing in space. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Kevin.
And I'm Welkin.
Since 1947, there have been many instances of organisms being launched into space for testing purposes. Several countries have engaged in testing the effects of space travel in low-gravity environments on a variety of organisms. These tests have helped to lay the groundwork for human space travel and have granted us a greater understanding of the effects of prolonged exposure to extraterrestrial environments on many different forms of life.
The first animals sent into space were fruit flies aboard a U.S.-launched V-2 rocket on February 20th, 1947. The experiment was intended to explore radiation effects at high altitudes. The fruit flies were recovered alive, showing that the radiation at high altitudes is not as dangerous as many had predicted. Within 3 years, a monkey named Yorick and 11 mice were recovered alive after an Aerobee missile flight of 236,000 feet at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico. York got a fair amount of press as the first monkey to live through a space flight, as there have been many failed launches previous to this success. Around the same time, the Soviet Union launched 2 dogs into space, but not into orbit. The dogs survived and became the first higher organisms to survive a space flight. At least 10 other dogs were launched into orbit in the suborbital flights before the historic date of April 12, 1961, when Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. Of these dogs, Laika is the most famous for being the first to orbit Earth in 1957. And in 1959, the United States launched monkeys Abel and Baker into space and recovered them successfully. This flight, as well as that of the dogs before them, helped to pave the way for the first humans in space by showing that higher organisms could survive the perils of space.
In 1960, the Soviet Union launched the satellite Sputnik 5. Sputnik 5 carried numerous animals such as rabbits, mice, rats, and flies. Its 2 dogs, Belka and Strelka, were also aboard. The animals aboard Sputnik 5 were the first Earth-born organisms to enter Earth's orbit and then return to Earth alive. Strelka later had 6 puppies. This experiment proved that animals are able to survive the conditions in space and do not suffer ill effects from space travel if the proper precautions have been taken. In 1961, the United States sent a chimpanzee named Ham into suborbital flight. Ham had been trained to push a lever upon seeing a flashing light before the experiment. After the rocket had been launched, Ham was able to replicate pushing the lever only a fraction of a second slower than he usually did it on Earth. His success proved that it is possible to accomplish the task while in space. Ham returned to Earth unharmed. In 1970, the orbiting frog otolith was launched, containing 2 bullfrogs in an attempt to study the effects of weightlessness on balance mechanisms and motion sickness. Inner ear balance mechanisms in the bullfrogs were monitored to assess their response to the conditions found in space. The experiment found that the frogs were able to adjust to their new conditions and remain in good health throughout the flight, showing that animals are able to adjust to the conditions encountered while traveling in space.
In 1985, Bion 7 was launched, which is a research satellite designed for the purpose of studying life processes such as regeneration and reproduction in space. The satellite contained 2 macaques, 10 male rats, and 10 newts, as well as flies, guppies, and some plants. The newts had portions of their front limbs amputated prior to launch in order to study the rate of regeneration and apply those findings to human recovery from injuries in space. In 2003, in spite of the Columbia spatial disaster that took the lives of 7 astronauts, researchers found that among many living experiments aboard, a suitcase-sized container of nematodes managed to survive re-entry, breakup, and impact of the accident. Scientists were able to study the effects of space on the surviving nematodes, and they showed signs of muscle loss, diabetic symptoms, similar to what humans experience. In addition, their survival proved to be valuable towards studies of interplanetary transfer of life by natural means. In 2007, tiny creatures called tardigrades, also known as water bears, were sent aboard the FOTON-M3 spacecraft launched by the European Space Agency and were exposed to open space. Surprisingly, many of them survived by going into a dormant state where they contract and cease metabolism until water is available. They resisted heat, cold, and radiation and were able to reproduce upon returning to Earth. It was previously thought that exposure to open radiation caused irreparable damage to tissue and DNA and caused sterility, but these creatures may have been able to repair this damage on their own. These water bears indicate that life forms capable of living and surviving naturally in the vacuum of space can and do exist.
Though many of these experiments have been deemed ethically questionable, we've gained an immense amount of knowledge and understanding from testing animals and other creatures in space. Not only have we learned about ourselves and how humans can survive in the depths of space, we've also learned what's possible for extraterrestrial life as well. In general, we have learned that life is extremely adaptable.
Early experiments involving animals in space showed that animals were capable of surviving space travel given proper protection and were always able to adjust to the conditions of space. The ability of animals to survive indicated that humans and other forms of life would also be capable of prolonged space travel. Later experiments involving organisms very different from humans gave a new look into the possibility of creatures naturally acclimated to space. Some of these creatures are able to survive the harsh conditions of space much longer than humans or even indefinitely when living in a dormant hibernation-like state. We've also seen that natural interplanetary population by way of these types of creatures is completely possible, but unlikely given the vast distances between objects found in outer space.
In conclusion, given what we've learned about Earth organisms in outer space, we can expect that extraterrestrial life will be similarly affected by the conditions of space. We've seen that creatures can survive these conditions, and although extraterrestrials of this nature may exist, it is unlikely that we will contact them. However, it is possible we will contact intelligent beings similar to ourselves that have designed ways to survive the perils of space and developed means of interstellar travel.
Thank you. That was our presentation on animal testing in space. Here are our references and more references. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.